All right, it looks like it has sort of, the number is stabilized. I think we are ready to get started. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Lynn Feeney-Hatton, Superintendent of Salisbury Township School District, and you're joining us for the operations meeting. Thanks for being here.
Okay, should I get started, Lynn, or are we waiting?
That's perfect.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for braving the roads to get here tonight. And let me start off by saying, pursuant to Board Policy 1B5, all meetings of the Salisbury Township School District are audio and video recorded. The district disclaims any and all liability arising from the recordings of the meetings and for any statements made by these in attendance. All right, and with that, welcome everybody to the February 3rd operations meeting. And with that, I'll call this meeting to order, and we will start with a roll call on Mr. Taylor.
Right, Mr. DeFrank.
Here.
Ms. Frick.
Here.
Mr. Gatanis.
Here.
Ms. Glenister.
Here.
Mr. Ganal.
Here.
Mr. Hattinger. Ms. Klinger.
Here.
Ms. Nemitz.
Here.
And Ms. Ziegler. All right, and we do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that takes us to item 2.1, the fiscal year 2021 results, along with the fiscal year 2021 status. Our CFO, Mr. Taylor.
All right. Let me share my screen for the presentation.
And
All right, can you see the presentation?
yes.
All right. We were hoping to have some more information on the audit from last year. We've been trying to follow up with the auditor in the OPEB report. We sent some information that they asked for last week, and we have not gotten an update. We tried to reach out to them, but I think with the snow days and wrapping up the W-2 processing last week, we haven't gotten an update, but they should be wrapping that up shortly. But as far as the presentation for the 2021 budget, we'll dive into that. So we'll just go over the timeline again, like we have in previous reports. So on the 17th, the next board meeting in 2 weeks, the board will be adopting a preliminary budget. The deadline to adopt is February 17th. So hopefully that doesn't get snowed out. Thank goodness we have Zoom, right? Then February 22nd, the preliminary budget verifying the tax increases due to the Department of Ed. And then on the 25th of February is the deadline for us to publish notice of intent to file for any exceptions to the Act 1 index. As the deadline to actually apply for the exceptions is March 4th. And these, a lot of these numbers you'll see are the same from January. There's not much updates yet as far as the value of a mill, the reduction in the taxable assessed value. Now, state revenues in our current preliminary budget and what we anticipate adopting in 2 weeks, we are not showing any increase in the state revenues except for the natural increases from PSERS and FICA based off of our expenditure increases. I will talk about the state budget in just a moment, as the governor did just do his presentation of his proposed budget today. And then federal revenues, once again, there's no increases budgeted. So the governor's budget, it was just presented this afternoon. Some of the highlights on it is calling for a $1.35 billion increase to the basic education funding formula. Based on that proposal, there are already numbers out of how it would affect different school districts. And the proposed 21-22 basic ed formula, funding formula would increase the district's revenue by $1.44 million, a 57% increase over the basic ed funding from last year. Last year, we received $2,522,541. For this current year, the state held that funding level. If you recall back to February of last year, when we were presenting, we had anticipated an increase of almost about 125, 130,000. I don't remember the exact number, but that was what was proposed in the governor's budget last year before the pandemic hit the economy in the budget for the state. They then did revise it in the final budget that they did not give us increases, but they held it steady. But as you see, this will be a 57% increase if this budget goes through as is presented. It's also a $200 million increase for special ed funding throughout the state. I don't have the numbers of how that would impact us yet directly. Now, for this budget to go through, the budget requires an income tax increase. The governor is proposing raising the personal income tax rate from 3.07% to 4.49%. Now, in the state of Pennsylvania, I believe it's the Constitution requires to have a flat tax rate, so they can't have different rates for different income earners like you have at the federal level. So it would be on all earners that are not exempt would have their income tax rate increased to 4.49%. Now, part of that is increasing the exemption rate. A single filer would go from $6,500 of income to $15,000 as exempt. And each dependent you would have would go from $9,500 to $10,000. So I believe a family of four, it was something like $50,000 would be the threshold before they would be taxed. Now it's a little bit different than the federal exemptions where the first so many dollars are exempted regardless of your money earned. This would be if you earned under that, you wouldn't pay any tax. And those who are over that rate would be taxed at 4.49 from their very first dollar earned. So the governor's proposing that it would lower taxes on a lot of the lower income earners, but raise it, I think, primarily on the higher 1/3 earners is, I believe, what they said in the news article I read. So while this funding would be very, very beneficial to the district and really help us close our budget gap, we are not accounting for that yet just because it was just proposed. Not sure how the legislator is going to react to that with that large income tax increase. One of the other things that would benefit us in this budget is the cyber charter school tuition would be limited, I believe, to about $9,000 a year. And we'll get into the charter school rates a little bit further in this presentation. So that would help, as charter schools do not have the same expenses that brick and mortars do for operations. That's something that a lot of school districts have been arguing about for a while and asking the legislator to consider. So it's nice to see that in the proposed budget. We'll see once again if that stays when they get through the final budget.
Mike, can I interrupt and ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Do we have an indication of how likely this budget is to pass in this form? And did the governor give any indication that our funding is going to stay at this level year to year? Or is it just like a 1 year, let's infuse some money?
Right. So the basic ed formula, which is basically the main funding we get for the school district from the state, like you see the 2.5 million. A number of years back, they changed the formula to make it what they considered more fair for school districts. So your base funding stays the same, and then each year they try to add a little bit more money to the pot. So this new money would be going through that new formula, and that's where we get the 1.4 million additional funding. The way they're basing it is not from a one-time revenue windfall or anything. That's with this big tax increase. So it's not guaranteed in perpetuity, but that's basically why they'd be raising taxes, to guarantee to offset the increase in funding with the revenue from income taxes. So I think that's the governor's plan, is to, permanently increase the funding, but it'd be a year-to-year thing. I wouldn't expect it to decrease. They usually have not decreased often. They usually try to keep it steady or add some more money annually. But if they do get this big increase, I would not expect significant increases necessarily the following years, but I would expect it to hold steady if they were able to put it through.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. That was my question too.
Mike, I'm sorry, I have a question. I'm sorry we're throwing you off kilter here, but the tax rate, the income tax rate, is that earned income or just flat out income?
Yeah, so Pennsylvania state tax is different than like your federal, where you have exemptions and parts of your income that is not taxed. Pennsylvania, it's basically every dollar that you earn is taxed at that rate, unless you are under the threshold for taxation. So currently, if a single person made $6,500 or less, they wouldn't be taxed at all. But as soon as you make $6,501 for a single person, currently you'd be taxed at 3.07 on every dollar you earn from day number one. So yeah, no, that would be 4.49% on all your income
Okay,
that's earned that you earn through the year. Yeah, so it's not like the adjusted gross income that you have for the federal taxes that your federal tax dollars are based off of. It's all your income.
so whether it's earned income or even capital gains, you're paying that.
Correct. Now, there are some caveats like your state pension and stuff like that are not taxed, but I mean, yeah, pretty much any income that you'd report on your state tax return would be taxed at
Right.
that.
Thank you.
Yep.
My question for you, I was reading just bits and pieces from PSBA and a release, I think, from the governor's office. And there was something that confused me. They talked about having auxiliary funds for school districts that if they make sure they keep the same amount of funding, because they may be going, because he wanted to put everything through the basic education funding formula and to make sure that some districts would stay whole, they had these auxiliary funds. Do you know what that's about and why that would happen? But for ourselves, looks like it's a windfall. I didn't quite understand that. And I don't know if you've gotten to that section or part. And I know the devil's in the details and it just came out today. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you have some insight on that, I'd be happy you could share that with us.
Yeah, the little bit that I know, it's kind of like what they do with a lot of federal grants. They want to supplement what you're already getting in income rather than supplant things. So they don't want us to get a $1.4 million increase and say, okay, we're going to reduce our taxes by 1.4 million, right? They want to make sure that this is additional money going to serve students' needs, not to offset other places and other income. So some of the calculations they look at is how much districts have raised taxes and where they've gotten the revenue before.
Okay.
They don't want you to take this and then and just have the same total budget and reduce other places that you get the money from. They want to make sure this is additional funding for the schools.
Okay. All right. I didn't quite understand that part, and there's only a paragraph. So thanks for explaining that, because I was a little nebulous. I was concerned that we may turn out a zero-sum game. They give this money here and they take it away elsewhere, which they've done in the past. So it makes it look like they're giving us money, but we don't come out with a net increase. So thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I'm not aware of right now, and I didn't see it yet, is like last year, they were looking to make the Ready to Learn block grant, which is, we get usually just over $100,000 annually for that. They wanted to put it in the basic ed formula. So they were showing, hey, you're getting an increase of like $200,000, but really 100,000 of it's money you were already getting somewhere else that they were taking away. So absolutely see that point. I haven't seen anything in the details as far as this currently, but
Okay.
a lot of this is based off of the additional tax revenue. So it doesn't look like it'd be replacing other things so far, but I mean, I haven't gotten all the details yet on that.
That's fine. That's good news. And I look forward to your further report outs, because as the devil's in the details. Many times we've gotten excited thinking we're going to get X, and it tends up to be a very small Y. So I look forward to your further insight on that, so we have a feeling how good this news can be. And we all know it's got to get through the legislature. So we'll see what the final verdict is as it goes through that body. Thank you.
You're welcome. And just from the past years, and the process we've used here is we've been very conservative with our state and federal revenues until we get to a point that we're pretty sure that it's coming in. We don't want to put this in the budget for 2 weeks from now from the preliminary budget, say we got 1.4 million, and then have them turn around and say, sorry, the legislator didn't raise taxes. You're getting only a $50,000 increase. And then we have to make that up in June. So we won't really be putting any increases in until we're assured that they are, substantially likely to happen. So while we're, very happily optimistic with this, until it irons out and we know that it's more certain, we'll be very careful with putting it in our projections.
And Mike, typically we know that in May, roughly.
Yeah, it depends on how contentious the governor's budget is. I know last year they tried to increase the minimum wage, which was a controversial issue with the state legislature. So that drug it out a little bit, and they tried to peel that out. That's the concern I have with the increase in the income tax, especially with the pandemic and the economic hardships people are having. But I think that with them raising the exemption rate, that they can say that the lower income people, the ones that will be really challenged by it, would benefit. So I think that might be the strategy to try to get it through the legislator, is that they are increasing the exemption rate. But yeah, that tax increase, I think, is going to be a little bit of a hurdle for them to overcome. But if it stays, it looks very, very optimistic. All right, is that all the questions on the governor's budget at this point? All right.
We're just trying to get you to lose track there, Mike.
That's all right. That's all right. But I like that you guys give the questions while they're fresh in your mind so that we're all there on the same page. So that's not a problem.
Thank you.
Under the expenditure considerations, it's the same thing we saw last month. You know, it's our salaries, our benefits, transportation costs, special ed, and charter schools. And special ed, you know, it's a little bit hard. We can look at our trends and forecast based off that, but you never know if next week somebody's going to be moving into the district or if somebody's going to be identified of having an issue that they need to be taken care of. And obviously we have the obligation to service those needs, but we can try to do projections. But one of the things we wanted to focus on tonight is really the charter school and cyber charter school costs. You might have heard some of the commercials on radio or on TV about charter schools, and it's tuition free, and that, you know, any family in Pennsylvania can sign up and it's tuition free. It doesn't cost any money. Well, that may be true directly to the families. It is not free, right? It's not tuition free. They bill the school districts where the student is a resident. And then the board is familiar with it, I think, but just to share for those who are not familiar, here's some numbers for our enrollments as of the month of November of 2020. Brick and mortar charter schools, we have 49 non-special ed students and 5 special ed students. Compared to last year, we had 47 and 3 respectively. So a slight increase in brick and mortar charter schools. Regional charter schools, which is similar to brick and mortar, they have a brick and mortar building. It's just how their charter is based. It gives a different consideration to the name. We had 27 non-special ed students, 1 special ed. That is up from 19 and 0 the year before. And then our cyber charter, which is the one that's really challenging because we do pay the same rate, even though they don't have the same cost as a brick and mortar. We had 26 students that are non-special ed and 8 special ed students compared to 20 and 4 respectively last year. And this is a trend we've had over the last handful of years of, you know, increases. Obviously with the pandemic, there was some concerns that they would increase. So there has been some, and just to be cognizant of that. We also want to highlight just the cost. So for each non-special ed student that goes to a charter school for the full year, the tuition fee to the district is $15,425.18. Now, if they've been classified as a special ed student, regardless of what their special ed need is, even if it's only a half an hour of speech and language per week, we now have to pay $35,461.66. It's a flat rate, like I said, regardless of what their special ed needs are. So that is a pretty big burden when to a school district. To put that in perspective, the cost and the impact it has on a school district, the median assessed valued residential properties in the school district is $176,400. At our current millage rate for this year of 20.5106, that median valued residential property generates $3,618 in tax revenue for the school district. So that means it takes 4 median residential properties tax dollars to support just 1 non-special ed student going to a charter school. That jumps to about 10 median residential property tax dollars to support 1 special ed student in a charter school. So once again, when they say it's tuition free, that means 10 households are paying just for 1 special ed student to go to a charter school. And we can provide a lot of the supports for these students at a more reasonable cost because it doesn't necessarily cost $35,000 more for 1 student to go to a charter school. And we don't save that money when they leave. So those tax dollars are leaving the district, but we're not saving that money. We're not eliminating or reducing a teaching position or other costs. So it's not really just dollar for dollar exchanging going to a charter school. The amount of money we're saving is very minimal when a student goes to charter school, but we have to have that expense. So that really puts a big impact on our district's budget. I hear a lot of times that people think that, oh, it's just the dollars that would have been spent towards that student, but that's not necessarily accurate. The preliminary budget expenditures, similar to what we saw last month, it's the existing positions. Last year, all staff took a salary freeze, so we have the natural raises built in based off of their contracts and agreements. That's in the current budget. The PESER's retirement, which the percentage rate of growth is 1.25%. Still growing, it's still very, very high, but the rate of growth has slowed down. And then our health insurance, we're budgeting still a 10% increase. Good news is our dental, which isn't a very large portion, but our dental, it looks like we're going to be going with a 0% increase on our dental for next year. So that's a little bit of help, but that 10% in the health insurance is still pretty big pill to swallow there. So just reminding you of what our current millage rate is in the allowable increase based off the Act 1 index. It's 20.5106 for the current year. With a 3% Act 1 index, we can raise it by 0.6153, which would give us the total allowable millage of 21.1259. And just a reminder of what the value of a mill is. So the allowable tax increase would really net us $770,955 increase in revenue from property taxes for the upcoming year. So the preliminary budget, we have expenditures currently of $39,848,240. If we were just to go on a property tax increase to cover that amount, it would require a millage rate of 22.1110, or an increase of 7.8%, which exceeds the Act 1 index. It's not allowed. What that really means is if the preliminary budget is passed at this rate, it would make the district eligible to apply for Act 1 index exceptions, and that'd be for the special ed exceptions. The PESER's, it doesn't look like we qualify just because the rate of growth has slowed. But if we apply for exceptions, you're limited to the lesser of whatever the calculation would be for the special ed exceptions or the budget gap in your preliminary budget. So while the gap is a little scary, it is kind of necessary to be eligible for those special ed exceptions. And we don't know what that calculation is yet. So this is, once again, rehashing that, the allowable exceptions. I do have special ed and PESER's listed, but PESER's, even though we'd qualify for the exceptions, there won't be any value to it this year, most likely. So this, once again, is just giving you a summary of the budget. If we did no tax increase, right now, we'd have a budget deficit of just over $2 million. If we go to the Act 1 index, the budget gap's just over 1.2 million. And the special ed exceptions are still to be determined, but you know, they're likely to be in the $600,000-700,000 range if the trends from the prior years hold. Now, if the governor's budget goes through as is, that puts us in a very favorable position with the Act 1 index, right? So we're going to hold our breath and be optimistic and see what happens with the governor's budget. So the governor's budget's good news if it goes through. And it definitely helps with our budget gap. So currently our administrative recommendation would be to adopt the preliminary budget in 2 weeks with the preliminary expenditures of $39,848,240 and the preliminary revenues based off the Act 1 index of $38,613,897. And that would leave us with a budget deficit of $1.2 million for the preliminary budget. The issues still to be resolved is obviously to see what hashes out with the state budget, any additional changes in tax assessments between now and then. We don't have any information on employee retirements yet. Those come in a little bit later. And then just also calculating out our special ed services costs as we get a better idea of what next year is going to look like, charter school enrollments. And then as we work through with different department heads, any additional budget savings that we can find and nail that down. So that's where we stand. I'll open it up now to any questions from the board.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
So just a concern about, hoping for the governor's budget kind of changes in directions. There's been some years where that budget approval has gone well beyond where we need it to be to make our decisions, because we have certain dates that we have to approve our budgets by. And if I'm not mistaken, there's been years where they approved the state's budget after we had to approve our budget. Am I wrong in that?
No, that's absolutely correct. There's been a couple of years where, if the state follows their schedule, we should have at least know what it's going to be before we adopt. But if it's contentious and if the governor holds firm on it and if the legislator wants to battle, yeah, it could very well come out later than we need to. And so I think what your question is what do we do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Part two, what do we do then? Yes.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things we would do. One, PSBA and PASBO, those organizations usually have some good intel of what might happen and what might shake out. And they can give us kind of like, here's the likely scenario, and we can hedge our bets, but we can't risk not being able to fund the district. So we would need to know with some certainty what we're at. So we definitely want to budget conservatively, but worst case scenario, if it's still not resolved and we don't know for sure, I think we'd budget without the increase. You'd have to go either with some additional cuts or take the exceptions. Now, if we get $600,000-700,000 of special ed exceptions, and if we are willing to use those exceptions, and with employee retirements and some of those other things, we could probably close the gap without, the very significant cuts we had to make last year, right? And in traditional years, we can get there. And if that were to happen and the budget comes through from the governor and we get to 1.4 million, well, then we have that money that would go to be a surplus potentially and help us rebuild fund balance. So it wouldn't be the end of the world, but yeah, it'd be a shame if it's still hanging out there and if we had to make cuts that hurt, right, because of it. But then if it does go through, then the board could then do a budget amendment and then increase some of the spending based off of the governor's money coming through later, right? So I'd say you want to take a conservative approach because we can't be left high and dry without that money if we were to put it in there and it didn't come through. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does.
Right.
My question for you, there's a timeline where we have to notify the state that we want to take exceptions and ask for that. Is that the meeting on the 17th where we would do that to be conservative? Not that we would, but we would leave it open to say we would so we could use that if needed.
Yeah, so basically when you adopt the preliminary budget, part of the resolution is going to be adopt the preliminary budget and to apply for exceptions, right? We won't necessarily know what the value of those exceptions will be until we fill out the process to apply for them. But applying for them, which the deadline to apply for them is March 4th, okay? We would put that in. It doesn't require you to take the exceptions. It just makes you eligible for the state to review them and let you know. And I think and then here, March 24th is the deadline for the Department of Ed to rule on the request for exemptions. And that's an annual process we've done. And there's been years where we haven't taken them. There's been years where we have. It's kind of like just leaving your options open, right? So we could apply for them. They could be granted. And then if the governor's budget comes through and we get the funding that is currently proposed, then the district would likely say we don't need them and just not take that exceptions, right? But it's good to have that option if the board deems it necessary.
Thank you. I just want to get clarity for everyone on here so they understand even if we request these exceptions, we don't have to go forward to them depending what the outcomes and what we find our revenue streams to be, but it's prudent to have them in your back pocket because we have responsibilities to balance our budget in a very uncertain time, especially as historically the governor and the legislature hasn't always played well together and it's taken a long time to figure out what they would be sending our way. Thank you.
Correct. And that's important to note that if we do not apply for them now thinking we're getting this money from the governor and then we don't, you can't go back and ask for it later. So it's good to have it there as an option. And most school districts apply for them, but the percentage that use them is not extremely high all the time. And the amount that use the full amount is even less. So it's definitely a tool that's good to have as an option.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Any other questions?
Doesn't look that way, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome. And we'll keep you updated as we hear more about the governor's budget.
Yes.
As we transition to the next item, if there are any citizens on the call tonight that would like to make a comment, please add your name and address into the chat.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Okay, that takes us to any other items from the board that people would like to question or bring up. Okay, seeing none, I'll bring one up. I've had a couple of board members reaching out for the possibility of starting to meet in person again. So I'd just like you guys to think about it, and we could possibly discuss it at the next meeting. Just consider it as to whether or not you'd be interested. One thing we do have to keep in mind, there's some people, especially in the west side, that at times have a hard time getting there in time. So just be respectful of them too. But nevertheless, just give it some thought. May we could discuss it at the next meeting.
Yeah,
Okay.
George, I wonder, I've been thinking about that because I'd like to be in person, but it's much easier for me to come online for Zoom. So, and I don't know if we could consider doing like our regular board meeting in person, but maybe our one of the other curriculum or the operations not in person, some sort of mix. That's
Sure.
my thought.
Yeah, understood. I'm spoiled because I only live a block and a half away. So
Right. And recently my job takes me straight up to 6. I used to be able to get off a little bit, but right now it's 6 o'clock and I'm out. So,
no, I understand. Just,
okay.
Everybody give it some thought, but I just wanted to bring that
Yeah.
up, to keep that in mind, to just be respectful of those who live on the west side. Okay, that takes us to citizen comments. Do we have anybody, Mike?
I'm not seeing anybody signed up in the chat for comments.
Okay,
I do. Sorry, I had one question I didn't squeeze in there. I just want to know from Lynn, does it look like we're going to be able to staff the high school the hours that we planned with the instructional assistants and all of that?
Yes, at this time it does. And if it doesn't, we may have to look at a reduced day in terms of the hours for instruction. And that would be, if there are significant quarantines or if there are staff members who, are unable to come in, it may be an issue. Right
Yeah.
now, we think we're able to make it work. It's not great. We're short instructional assistants. Some of the other programmatic services will have to be adjusted to accommodate one-to-one learners, one-to-ones for some of our special education learners to make sure that we're meeting their needs. So we're doing the best we can. Some of our learners are still staying remote. So that makes a difference in terms of staffing. So we're doing the best we can. We'll keep you updated.
Thanks.
Lynn, do we also know if our teachers and staff have begun having access to the vaccine yet? Is that still coming?
So if you are aware, we as educators are in 1B, phase 1B by job classification. Phase 1B, we were this close to having the opportunity to move on to phase 1B, and there were some adjustments made to phase 1A, and phase 1A now includes some additional categories, including people ages, I think it's 16 to 64. I don't have it in front of me, but in general, 16 to 64 with a medical concern. So there may be some staff members who've already received the vaccine through that lens, but not through the lens of phase 1B as an educator. I've reached out to both Lehigh Valley and St. Luke's to see if there's anything they can do for us. Can we get leftover vaccines? We'll have people there in 15 minutes if they tell us they're available. So we're doing what we can, knowing that the state has changed the classification of availability for 1A.
Okay, I know you've had your eye on it. I just haven't talked to you about it in a while.
Yeah.
and I guess 65 and over is now, I don't know if we have do we even have any teachers that are 65 or over?
I don't know how many we would have, but certainly some of our staff has had the opportunity to be vaccinated.
Okay. All right, any other questions?
Before we wrap up, Mr. Gatanas, could I just throw out a compliment to our facilities department, led by our Director of Facilities Safety and Security, Mr. Bill Brackett. And the team, the work they've been doing to clear the lots has been daunting, to say the least. If you imagine your own driveways times however many square feet with our facilities, they're working really hard. It's a struggle. There's nowhere to go with the snow, and it is a real challenge. So I want to thank the team for their work and Bill for his leadership. I think he's on here tonight, so thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. You have anything you'd like to say, Bill?
Mhm.
We're still working at it. It's daunting. It's not the biggest storm we actually had in 2016. The storm was bigger, but the snow was a little bit lighter. We were able to move it and push it out of the way a little bit better. This got wet at the end, and just it's just been daunting with our particular equipment. I went down 2 trucks today, one for a transmission, one for a blown hose on a plow. So we got to get those back up and running. But it's been daunting, but I think by the close of business tomorrow, I think we'll be in real good shape.
I think it's tough all over. I was surprised. I mean, I think Bethlehem, Allentown, the small towns of like Macungie, Emmaus, there's just so much snow everywhere for even people to get their cars out, you know. So if we could, and not 2 lanes aren't open, right? That's part of the problem too.
Well, that's a big concern of our transportation department, the fact that many of the roads, they do not feel as though there's enough room for a bus and a car to pass. And that's, that's going to be a challenge for resuming bus runs. We're not the only district experiencing it. If you saw Facebook or online, most of the districts, again, are fully remote tomorrow as well, for similar reasons.
Right.
I drove to Wegmans this afternoon, and it's a short drive. It's only like 5 miles, but I was, the roads that are plowed well, but they're certainly not plowed very wide. So not surprised at all.
Yeah, that's an issue with the buses. Like on the east side here, the roads are really narrow and there's parking on both sides. So even without traffic going in both directions, just getting the bus through is a project, let alone both directions. So it's a challenge.
And the roads that may prevent us from being able to have school on Friday physically face-to-face for our K-1 learners as well. Hoping the township can continue to make steady progress. I know the trucks are out and they're working hard as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks again, Bill, and convey that to all the guys too.
Thank you for saying so.
Okay, if there's nothing else, it takes us to upcoming meetings. We have next regular board meeting is on the 17th of February at 7:30, and I'm sure we'll have an executive session before that. You'll be hearing on that. We have a curriculum meeting February 22nd at 7, and our next operations meeting is March 3rd at 7. So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? I'll say no, just to mix it up a little bit. All right. Take it easy, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you to our
Good
night.
citizens who joined us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.